Welcome to today's webinar on Identity and Access Management 101, the basics of Identity and Access Management. I'm Katie Pascan with Pathmaker Group and will be the moderator today. We will begin shortly. We have 4 panelists today. Brian McDaniel, our lead panelist, is an information security, identity, and access management professional with over 20 years of experience deploying and managing identity and access management services in large, complex environments. Recent experience includes managing identity and access management on-premise and SaaS-based services for one of the world's largest brand name apparel marketers with $4.6 billion in annual sales, 24,000 global employees, and 3,000 plus retail stores. His business focus and interests include planning, budgeting, and deploying complex identity and access management implementations for on-premise, cloud-based, and mobile application services with a strong focus on business delivery that is on time and on budget. Benita Bashan is the president and enterprise architect at Panas Research. Keith Squires is the president and CEO at Pathmaker Group. And Eric Schultz is the senior security architect for Secure IT. Keith, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thank you, Katie. And welcome everyone. We really appreciate you guys joining. This is one in a long series we've been doing of these sessions. And our purpose here really is to just share good information that can help you with your identity access management journey. We've brought a number of different people to the table to enlighten and help us discuss these topics. Today, we're really privileged to have a longtime customer and friend in Brian McDaniel, and we're going to put him on the hot seat. He's got a wealth of experience. We've been working with Brian for a long time, since about 2004 or 5, I believe. We go back a long ways. So he's got plenty of scars to talk through, and that's what we're going to do today. I do really like to have Q&A from the audience. We've got a lot of folks on the call today and a lot of different titles from risk and compliance to managing programs to the whole gamut in between. So I know that you guys all have different questions that you'd like addressed, and we'd love to be able to do more of that today and make it interactive. And if we don't get to all of them, we can certainly respond via email or have follow-up discussions with you guys. So let's kind of get into it. We talked a little bit about this program or this webinar being around basics, but really, it's basics plus it's kind of modernizing and leading to a strategic program. That's really what we want to help folks understand. The people who are on the call today have been through many, many, many years of deploying these technologies and these programs and processes. So we're going to just bat some ideas around as we go through and make sure we bring up topics that we think are relevant. You have all of our contact information on LinkedIn, so please feel free to reach out to us if you need, just some thoughts and discussion around ideas or challenges that you're having. We welcome that. So today, let's talk about identity access management. We'll call it basics or one-on-one. There are many, many technologies, processes, things that you have to get into when you're deploying identity access management. It fits within security, but is not a traditional security play or process. Identity access management is a journey. It's a process, and it probably aligns more like deploying an ERP system than it does typical security technology. So because of that, it really needs to be approached as more of a program that will occur over many phases and steps over many years and continuous improvement as part of that. But there are a lot of different things that you can do with identity and access, and you need to understand what your business needs mostly and how you align your priorities and your projects and your program with the strategy within your business and your stakeholders. So what we've built is a mechanism to basically help you understand everything that can occur within identity access, the capabilities you can provide, and it's not just technologies, it's also processes within your organization, and it's supporting your auditors, and it's operations, and it's how you govern your program. So there's more to it than just trying to install some technologies. There's a lot of aspects that you need to consider. And as a practice, our company provides this identity access management map assessment, which is basically a way to baseline where you're at today and understand where your gaps are. So if you know where you're weak and where you can improve, then it's a lot easier to understand how to prioritize, how to address things that are gaps that may really need to be uh, put up first and foremost based on what your business needs and the requirements that you're facing. So there are about 80 measurements in this process, and just for today's discussion, we're going to use this illustration just to align topics and discussions. If you need to do a baseline assessment like what we're talking about here, this is a one-day event. We do about 4 hours of Q&A with your key stakeholders, and then we'll talk about the outputs in the second half of the day. It can provide some very revealing information, and it's done in a quick way. It gets you a lot of good results very quickly. So feel free to follow up with Katie if this is something you want to approach. For today's topics, you can see that there's 8 levers in this wheel. We're going to pick out about 3 of them today, and we're going to talk about some basics and maybe some things that are strategic in those areas, and get into the weeds a little bit. But as you can see, it's a robust program. The wheel covers it all, and feel free to reach out and talk about if you need to talk about more than what we're going to cover today. So Katie, let's move to the first topic, which I believe is going to be around governance. And for each of these topics, we're just going to talk a little bit about what it is, and then how it helps you strategically and some of the challenges. So this will be more of a free-flowing discussion as we move along here. So just basically, program governance when it comes to IAM has to do with really putting a program in place that's going to help you establish long-term success. Katie, can you go ahead and go to the next slide? You can see the topics that we cover when we do the Q&A around this. But basically, you want to look at a program and say, how can we make sure that we're going to be successful when we plan it, establish it, try to enforce policies and procedures around this program at an enterprise level. What do we really need to do to get to a very mature state, make sure we approach things in the right sequence and order, get the right support in place. So here's the topics we talk about, right? How do you get your stakeholders aligned and make sure you have their support? How do you build a strategy and a roadmap that aligns with your business? How do you put a steering committee together that can help support, resolve conflicts, make sure organizational priorities are in place? What about how you implement this thing? What's the approach you're going to use? Are you agile? Are you waterfall? Are you something in between? What's the right way to do these projects? What about measurements? As we move through these projects and programs, what do we need to measure to make sure we stay on track? And then, there's standards and architectures that need to be in place to make sure all of your IAM components align and that you get that done in an orderly and efficient manner where you're not having to backtrack or make corrections along the way. So with that, I'm going to bring in Brian to the discussion. And Brian, let me just ask you right out of the gate, because you've had to do this, right? When you're starting an IAM program, when you're starting down this journey, what are some of the key things that you need to make sure you have in place right out of the gate to ensure success as you start?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Keith. So yeah, this is Brian McDaniel, and I'm actually a recent retiree from Levi Strauss & Company. So I have been doing this for about 25 years. As Keith mentioned, I've known him for a very long time, incredible provider. So he asked me to join this to see if I could share some of my learnings after doing this for some 25 years in a Fortune 500 company. So as far as stakeholder support, I mean, obviously all of these topics are very important, right? Depending on how big your organization is, you might just be a US based company. We were working in like 110 countries. So stakeholder support is really, really important. And I think of that more than just, your technical partners that help you with an implementation. It's your business partners, right? It's the people at the end of the day that are trying to help you implement tighter controls. And you're trying to make sure that you're not creating a lot of friction in the business by doing so. So stakeholders for us were all the way from business leads, IT leads, your service providers that are helping you roll out the solution, whether it's your networking guys, your Active Directory guys, your SAP functional support teams, and then those people that actually take it to the run state, right? If you're an architect and engineer like myself, a lot of times it's very easy to get caught up in the technical aspects of it and not spend enough time on the operational aspects of it when you're handing this particular solution off. So yeah, that's just real important. It's thinking about the solution end to end, not just from a business perspective. I mean, not just from a technical perspective, but mainly from a business perspective.
And Brian, you dealt with a global organization. I know there's a lot of people on here that have large enterprises that are at least national and some global. What did you see specific challenges with a global organization that you could speak to a little bit?
Absolutely. So relationships, for me, relationships matter, especially when you're working long distance, right? And when you have most of your communications going back and forth with your partners overseas just through email, and you don't get really a chance to catch up and build relationships. For me, it was real important that I took the time out every week to meet with these people one-on-one. It's amazing what you can get through a conversation versus an email, as far as what their concerns might be, things they might be interested in. And oh, hey, Brian, by the way, these people in Germany, they're thinking that they'd like to have this particular capability. What do you think we could do to help them? So for me, working globally, I always counted on them to help execute global processes and controls, but I also needed them to help gather requirements from the regions and actually different countries that didn't necessarily always bubble back up to me, right, through the governance. I'm getting it directly from the local support teams within country and within that particular region. So stakeholder support is absolutely key. You have to know exactly who your partners are. Everybody has to be on the same page as far as what the deliverable is, and you have to make sure that whatever solution that you're rolling out actually meets or exceeds the requirements.
Right. And then on the other end of the spectrum, obviously you've asked what they need. Now perhaps you have to turn it around and say, okay, I need your help to enforce what we're putting in place, right? So you may have a reference architecture model, you may have standards compliance with onboarding new applications so that you stay aligned with your new program. What did you find most challenging about enforcing those kind of standards with your global rollout?
So to be honest, it wasn't really so much. What's interesting is when you want everybody to comply by standards globally, the best method that I had was explaining to people in simple business terms why we needed to have these controls in place and why you're asking them to do something different, right? And how you're trying to make sure that you're keeping the friction low in the business from an operational perspective, but yet you're tightening up your controls and you're raising the bar. So that's the most important message for me always was, unless I'm talking to a technical person, right, or an architect, that helps, but usually there's a business person in the back. So, in the background that they're going to have to satisfy as well. So if I can give them the business perspective, especially if they're in another region, they can take that business perspective that I just gave them and take that to their customers that are in country. So everybody has the same common understanding. So, but it is important that you have architectural standards, you have technical standards on how you do things, how you create an identity, how you remove one, how you modify one, so on and so forth. But, a lot of that's just, again, it's communications and relationship management.
Right. And the common thread, Brian, that we always saw with you being so successful is that you were the organizational champion for identity access management. And I don't want to ignore that. I mean, it's so important to have someone within the organization that really understands and champions this program and really takes it by the reins and kind of moves it forward. I know you always did a very effective job. Your focus on communication is part of the reason you were so successful. But that's one point I just want to bring up. Every organization needs someone that really champions this process and gets all these things in place for the governance side of the process.
Absolutely. And then you have your sponsors above you, which is your CISO. For me, a lot of that was chief financial officer or chief legal counsel. But for me, I never went to my sponsors and asked for some additional help because I couldn't get somebody to follow along with the program, or I was getting some pushback, which happens. It was really important to me that I was able to always, be successful in a project or some operational effort where I never had to go back to the sponsor. I was able to manage that myself.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Katie, let's go ahead and move to the next topic, which Vanita's going to kick off here for us.
Yeah, so thank you, Keith. Thank you, Brian. So authentication and authorization, it's kind of a passion of mine, let's put it that way, because it's one of the complex areas of identity and access that everybody struggles with, right? You talk to any organization, they know certain things they want, and they don't know, and they've got these complex designs. And fundamentally, what are we talking about, right? Because we're talking basics today. Authentication is really deciding that whoever is coming in and asking for access is who they say they are. And you've got an identity that they provide, and you've got something they provide like a credential. And you decide based on both of those that, yep, this is the person who they say they are. And then there's the complex part of, now that you know who they are, what rights do you give them? What accesses do you give them within your system? Right? And often they get munged together, and there's a whole, sort of lot of confusion around this. So Katie, if we could move to the next slide. I think strategically, we all understand that it's the first time a user is interacting with your system in terms of logging in and telling you who they are and giving you this information. You want to make that as smooth as possible, right? And there's the whole concept around single sign-on. And making sure that people don't have to enter different sets of credentials. Because from a security point, we know it's a nightmare. More passwords, more chance of exposure. But on the flip side, from a user experience, it's equally bad. Because now they have to enter different credentials to get access to different things. So single sign-on, we can all latch onto it as something that is important. People put in a set of credentials and they have accesses to what they need. Now, Brian, I'm going to turn this to you from this area of how did you manage? Because I know these single sign-on solutions can get as big and as complex as you want them to be. How do you go to the board or wherever you go and justify some of the budgets you need? Because single sign-on solutions don't come cheap. So what is it you've done that's been successful for you to get, people on board with this kind of a long-term project?
So that's a great question. So a lot of times I'll take my security hat off and put my business hat on. So an example of this one is, with single sign-on services, can I give the customer access to everything that they need through a single pane of glass? Mm-hmm. And so an example of that is, if I log into some portal, do I have all my applications up in front of me that I need to do my job? Can I read my email? Can I do my financials? Can I do my HR work? Can I do what it is that I need to do on a daily basis to do my job? So seeing that through a single pane of glass is extremely helpful from a business perspective, especially if you can do that not just through the PC or the web interface, but your mobile device as well. Mm-hmm. With COVID, being single sign-on was a tremendous help for us from a COVID perspective. In fact, we got some positive feedback from the CEO of the company, how easy it has been because we had so many applications in a single pane of glass. You've got people that are locked down at home, somebody, their laptop breaks, right? You can't go to the facility because you're in COVID lockdown. How do you get that person back online? Well, if you can do it all through a web interface and a single pane of glass, I could probably get your home PC to do it, but I'm going to ask you to do some things to your home PC to do that. But it's a web interface. I don't have, a thick client that I have to install on another machine. I can do it all through any web browser. And the same would be for my mobile device, right? If, somebody opens a service ticket to me, or somebody has some HR request and I'm driving down the road with my family, I can easily pull over the side of the road, pull my mobile phone out, approve a request. That's all capable. You're capable of doing that because of single sign-on services. For us, it was a menu of options. We did a lot of different things. So there's the web piece of it, which is usually for your PC and your mobile, web mobile. And then we also did a lot of, mainly in the retail environment, we did a lot of OpenID Connect, because that's what it's all about now. People want to be able to use their mobile device. It's like, I'm going to go on vacation with my family and I need to be able to do all these things, but I don't want to carry my PC. So how do you enable that from a business perspective? Single sign-on is the answer for me. And to your point, it solves a lot of security problems, and it solves a lot of operational problems. I don't have to keep calling in, can you reset my password?
Right.
I forgot my password. Well, if there's 200, if there's 400 different global applications out there, that can be a lot of passwords. And then even with your single sign-on solution, you can also do self-service password reset, which is a huge help. So single sign-on was just absolutely key for us. We were a cloud-first organization, even though we did. We had a hybrid model, a huge facility over here in Dallas. It runs 90% of our global business out of this facility in Dallas. A lot of it was just purely cloud. We were putting up a new cloud application for single sign-on services, which included all the integration, all the homework that the customer is going to need to know, how they communicate that to their customers, how you're going to access the application. Now, we would do one every 2 weeks, and we were nailing 30 to 40 applications up a year easily. So it's just a huge help from a business perspective, as well as a security perspective, from a security perspective, as you stated.
Brilliant. So I can see I would be very convinced if you came and made that argument to me. That was amazing. But now I want to take something sort of associated with that, multi-factor authentication, right? It's sort of, everyone's talking about MFA, and now everything gets solved. You forgot your password, we'll give you multi-factor, you'll get a token on your phone, you'll get something or the other, and now you have. Is multi-factor authentication truly something you should put across the board? Is it something you should do at the portal when someone logs in? How do you decide? And I'd like your experience. How did you decide what applications have MFA, what don't, and is it one size fits all?
So I never was the person that liked to use what I would call the Big Bang Theory. Like, let's just turn it on for everything at one time. From a business perspective, and again, I'm going to put my business hat on. From a business perspective, I never found that to work very well. You would get a lot of, if you turn it on for everybody and everything at one time, you're going to have a lot of confusion and a lot of noise and friction in the business. Rule number one for me was, let's get it done and find some wins along the way, and we build upon our wins till we're finally successful with a full implementation. I would gain more confidence within the business, because they would say, oh yeah, that was easy, Brian. And so the next time I went to them and asked them, like, you know what, I've got MFA for these treasury applications. I've got these finance cloud applications that I've got out there. I'm going to put MFA on them as well. And usually the answer would be, well, okay, we already know how to do that. Just go ahead. Right.
So you got them familiar with the concept.
Absolutely.
And yeah. Okay. And then on that whole thing, right? Because there all these things on these topics on this subject, there's so much we could talk about. But fine-grained authorization, I'm going to jump to that because I hear that all the time. Coarse grain, fine grain. What is it in your experience? How do you go about this? Because people will say to me, well, isn't the authentication solution and the authorization solution going to handle every single permission in every single app? And we all know that doesn't really work so well. So what was your take on this?
Well, you're right. It doesn't work well. So you can do some authorization with it, right? So especially with single sign-on services.
Mhm.
So if I'm messaging back and forth to like a cloud application saying, hey, I belong to group A, B, C, and D, and they can interpret those 4 groups to mean some particular authorization on the
Right.
application on their side, then that's great. But usually that's role. You're getting role assignments through group assignments back to the cloud side, but it's not the fine grain entitlements that you would
Right.
get within the application. For us, the way that we did fine grain controls, especially within SAP, you have to use SAP GRC.
Yep.
You cannot do that. I have now I can assign roles through an identity management system, whether it's a connector or whether it's a new SAP connector or some SAML group association. I'm not going to get the same level of control and accuracy as I would with a GRC system sitting within SAP.
So just to sort of summarize what we've talked about, single sign-on, you agree, it's really, really critical. Multi-factor authentication, it isn't across the board. It should be based on risk and what you need. And then as far as fine-grained authorization, we should really focus on the things that can be given commonly across the applications to which you have single sign-on, and leave the others to manage their own internal controls, right? So I know I scratched the surface of the topic, but there's so much we could talk about. So if anyone throws this out as a suggestion of something we need to take further on, we'd love to hear from you. So with that,
Vanita, we did get one question that's related. I'll just toss it out to you. Someone asked, how do you manage granting and revoking access to external websites when people can do self-registration?
wow. Okay, thank you. And
you're limited to 2 minutes in your response.
Oh, good Lord. Anyway, so topic-wise, interesting, right? Because now you've got your external app and it's got all these controls in there, and you're trying to manage it from the out, literally from the outside, because you are sitting outside the app. It is really tricky. And the way I've talked to people about doing this is really looking at it as policies. Not just trying to go and say, okay, for this app, this is how I do it, and for this is how I'll do it. But really decide, is the end application one that you consider high risk? Is it medium risk, or is it simple? And then based on that, build a policy on how you're going to manage the permissions within it, and then apply it appropriately. And it's a topic we could go on forever. Keith's going to sort of ring some bell now and tell me time out. So I'm going to let him go back to the next topic. And if there's more to that question, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk about it.
Very good. Thank you, Vanita. Okay, Katie, well, let's move to our third area. We probably got about 10 more minutes. We'll get into this and then have some time for Q&A. So identity governance, when you talk about identity governance, there's really, I'm going to say, 2 key drivers to doing, call it provisioning or identity governance with these tools. Some companies approach core identity management because they need to do access certification and compliance support, remediation. Other organizations approach it because they need to provision user accounts and they need efficiency and security around controlling access. Whichever your driver is, they both can be good starting places to get going on an identity management project with a provisioning or governance tool. Identity governance speaks to those topics where you're really trying to manage, control access, provide compliance support, make sure that people who have access to things have only what they need access to, and that someone's looking at that on a periodic basis and making sure it's accurate, right? So, Katie, let's look at the topics in this area. Again, the definition we use here, it's a set of processes that allows owners to understand the rights, proactively manage those roles and privileges, and then satisfy audit and compliance that you're actually adhering to some type of a review or management of those privileges. The topics include separation of duties conflicts, which are very critical in some organizations. How do you do certification? How do you make sure that your regulatory requirements are met using these tools? How do you set up and enforce policies? Risk management is a big area in here where you can approach things based on risk levels. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's some fraud capabilities in these technologies, also tools to help you with role mining, where you look at all your entitlements and figure out ways to group them up so that you can understand how to define roles better. UBA, or looking at actual user behavior and putting some of that intelligence into what you're doing with these tools. How do you manage roles in the life cycle of a role? As soon as you define a role, it could be stale. So how do you make sure the roles you've defined stay accurate? And how do you govern data that's out there in the wild, spreadsheets and Dropbox and all the different places where you can have data sitting around? Access to that is just as important to access to an application. So how do you manage that and govern access to that in an orderly fashion? There's a lot of things that you can do with these technologies to improve these processes and safeguard your environments. So Brian, let me just turn to you again. We talked a little bit about certification and how that process needs to work, both in kind of an early stage, and then as you move along and do it in a more mature model. What's your experience with certification? Because I know when we first started working with you, we started off doing a project because you wanted global control over the provisioning process, but we got hijacked, during the first phase of the project, and it became all about SOX compliance, right?
Yeah.
So that was its most basic form of making you guys compliant, and it was really successful. So how do you get into that at an early stage?
So in my world, it was always the risk and compliance team, my audit partners, legal counsel, so on and so forth, that would come and say, because it was interesting. We at Levi, we did an IPO last year, and so needless to say that we had an army of auditors going through our environment before we went through an IPO. So I will tell you that all these things are important, right? Access certification, again, it's one of those things that how do I get this work done without having a lot of friction in the business. I guess you can tell I don't like friction in the business. I like to just get it down. So I would say most of this, like your SOD reviews, your access certification, your regulatory compliance, if you can do a lot of these things, you will be compliant. The best message I would give is try to automate as much of it as possible. Sometimes you're not able to do that. I don't have the right connector. I don't have this, I don't have that. So if you can put some manual processes together and then come back to that and then automate that, that's great. But for me and my external auditors, who was Price Waterhouse, if we did anything manually, it got more scrutiny than you could ever imagine.
Right.
That was number one. Number two is, like, let's say if we're doing access certifications, okay, if you did that manually, you're going to get a ton of scrutiny. If you're doing it through some homegrown scripts, that was even worse, because then they start challenging the integrity of the scripts, right? I mean, literally, we would gather scripts and send them off to PwC and, under NDA and say, and they would have some technicians that would go through it and say, oh yeah, that looks like it would work okay. The best thing is to use commercial tools and automate as much as possible.
And when you say automate, you mean things like connect to the application directly and pull the entitlements automatically and take all the hands out of the process, right?
Absolutely. Workflow as much as you can. And the other aspect of that is, and I'm sure a lot of other companies are like that, but in a COVID-19 world, I don't think a lot of people are hiring. So what you're getting is more demand and fewer resources. And then, so how can I keep meeting the strategic objectives of the business if I'm down in the weeds doing access certification all the time and I haven't workflowed and automated it all, right? Because I need those resources for these new objectives that the business wants, or putting up more single sign-on apps. So I would say automation, do it with commercial tools. You can do it with homemade scripts, but for me, that was a little more challenging because I had to sit on the phone for several hours with PwC and explain scripts. No, seriously.
Yeah, I got it. We hear that all the time. So let's talk about a capability that's maybe at the other end of the spectrum for those who have, kind of gotten through this process. There's a lot of new innovative features that are coming to the market that are, let's call them machine learning based, that can say to someone, based on history, a lot of this stuff gets done the same way every time. So why keep doing it? What do you think it would take for an organization like Levi to get the audit team to buy into a capability that would make a recommendation and say, hey, this is always done this way anyway, so why are you going to force your people to go through it? Why don't you just focus on this smaller pool, that's more based on risk?
So, yeah, so my audit team was always interested in the higher risk areas, obviously, right? More specifically, your finance systems. And ours was huge. 3 instances of SAP across 3 different regions. None of them the same, configured the same. That process was in place to go to a cloud-based solution for SAP when I left. But again, if there's machine learning, or if you want to call it AI, because that's the new word everybody wants to use, right? If that capability is there and you can prove to them that it works, and more importantly, not just prove to them, but convince them that you can prove that they can prove that to Price Waterhouse, right? Because many times, even though you satisfy the needs of your auditors, the external auditors will come back and give your internal auditors a hard time, or they can be challenging. Whether that control is, it's working as expected, if you will.
Right.
So I think it's just a matter of getting a hold of technology. And if you've got that much free time, get a hold of the technology, run that through. If you can convince your auditors that it works, then now you've created a relationship. For me and my auditors, actually, some of my auditors are truly some of my best friends. I still converse. The head of audit for Levi Strauss is a very close friend of mine, but we built that relationship out of trust. Right. I've never told them something that was untrue that they would have to turn around and pass them back up to PwC or, something like that. So I would say prove that it works, partner with your auditors, your legal team, if required. And then, reach out to your external auditors if you're a publicly traded company like we are, and ask them about it and get their feedback. And then that way, when you go into your next audit cycle and you have these technologies in place, you've had that discussion up front. And
sure.
It'll just make your life a lot easier.
And with the last couple minutes we have here, can we talk a little bit more about risk and how that's viewed across, the targets and applications that you have to deal with? What kind of mechanism or construct did you guys use when you were trying to decide, okay, let's focus on the risky stuff? How did that play out? If somebody's just starting and they want to focus on the most risky things, can you give them some suggestions on how to assess that?
Well, so for me, a lot of that was experience, right? But again, that's where your friends in audit and compliance, you need to pull them in. For me, it was a lot of times, a financial audit, not an ad hoc audit that I had to deal with. So that usually focused around, financial systems like us. It's, SAP, it's your financials, it's your treasury, it's your HR systems, It's your key systems that help run the business. It's the systems that help you make product, deliver product, and sell product, and pay people, right? I don't mean to make it sound that simplistic, but you always need to look out for that stuff that's flying under the radar that maybe even your auditors don't see. And so we had some unique treasury applications before we were in our IPO that, you know, you trip across this stuff as you have conversations with your business partners. And I'm not talking about talking to technical people. I'm talking about talking to people in treasury, that you start finding out stuff that maybe you didn't, about stuff that you didn't know before, a key application where it didn't have the right controls on it. So that's always a big win, especially when you take that to your CISO, and your CISO can tell that to your CFO. Hey, we found these particular applications. They're key, they're treasury, they're finance, or, you know, they're compensation for executive applications that are compensations for executives, all kinds of stuff that's not going to be on your radar in a financial audit. You always have to look through the portfolio and start picking these things up, and then socialize that. Which again, that's relationship management, right? You socialize that, and you get backing and support and a sponsor, and you start prioritizing it. Again, I was not the kind of guy that went out and tried to eat the whole elephant. I tried to get quick wins, just as quick as I could, and take those small wins and build them into larger wins over time.
Right. One of the foundational aspects of any program we always recommend is making sure you've got a good, comprehensive and thorough inventory of your applications.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it sounds like if you've got a good handle on that, then it kind of goes back to stakeholder support. You partner with your audit team to make sure you know their priorities and that you guys are working in sync on what is high risk based on their definition as well. So you're satisfying them while you're moving through this. So excellent. Vanita, anything else to add to this topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we just recently had a customer where access certification, they're rolling out an IGA solution, and they were talking about access certification and how to pick their apps. And we went through a categorization process with them. And some of those apps we talked about were actually external websites, coming back to that old question. And what we did was we went through those, decided which ones actually had material that we were concerned about. And then we looked at how they actually gave access to those resources in that third-party application. So there was a lot of planning and work at the back end to build these policies. But ultimately, we built 3 policies, and we said, this is for our high-risk applications. And this is where we're going to scrutinize, and we're going to decide, is this the application? Then we went to the medium. And again, you know, we decided which ones they were, and we had a little less restrictive. And then when we came to the simple policy, we said it just passed through, right? And so it actually helped us once we had that categorization, not only from an identity governance perspective and access certification, but also from an authentication purpose. So you can multi-use this thing you create. So it's well worth the time and effort that you put into it.
Yep.
Yeah, Keith, I'd like to echo that. Vanita, you're totally right. So for us, most of the work was not the technical aspects of it. It was the analytical work that you just described. Keith will tell you this. I spent more time on analysis and design than probably anybody I know, but I wanted to make sure that on go live it worked as expected.
Yeah, and kudos to Brian. He was, you know, I'll just call him a pit bull on that kind of thing, because you know, review and make sure it's right. And then the implementation was pretty straightforward. Typically, we didn't get surprised too often,
exactly,
because of the work that was done up front. Yep.
So Katie, it's back to you. Questions and answers, or anything else you want us to do?
Perfect. Thank you, Vanita. And thank you to our panelists. This is Katie again, your webinar host. I wanted to remind everyone listening that at the bottom of your screen, you should see question, answer, and poll options. So it's now time to complete and submit your poll. If you have any questions for our panelists, go ahead and submit those now, and I will get ready to read them to the panelists. So I'm going to end the polling now. I clicked end polling, and now I'm going to click share results. So you should be able to see the results up on your screen. I'd love to give the panelists an opportunity to comment on any patterns or trends that you would like to call out. So I'll pause for a minute and give you guys a second to read through these results here, if there's anything you want to highlight. And you should be able to see all the questions by scrolling. There's a gray bar at the right side of the screen. You just grab that, it'll scroll up and down.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, a very similar pattern with a lot of these topics. There is down towards the end, multi-factor is definitely picking up steam.
Yeah.
Based on our survey evolution here, we ask this question most webinars, and it's definitely higher now than it has been. And I'm sure that's in large part because of COVID, and other remote worker challenges. So that's a good one. The other thing I'm encouraged to see is the answers on number 8 about the budgeting. It sounds like many companies are prioritizing identity access, which is excellent. Having an ongoing budget allocation for this process and these technologies is really critical to sustain momentum in a program going forward. So that's encouraging to see.
So I wanted to add one thing, right? Keith talked about the IAM map assessment that we all offer, and I know all 3 companies offer it, so we help you baseline. In addition, I just wanted to share a quick plug, and Katie, could you share that slide I sent you about I'm Smart? Because what we've done is we've taken some of that, and we've taken that approach of automation, coming back to what Brian said, right? So you answer these questions, you help us build the map. And then based on that, what we do is we take your answers and put it into a system we've built called IAM Smart. What we do is we give you a heat map. It produces it instantaneously. And the heat map is obviously very simple. Green means you're good to go, you're doing well in that specific area. Yellow means, hey, you need to start prioritizing projects around this area. Things are not as great. And red means, guys, you need to do something quickly, right? And what we do is we take that, because that output comes right almost instantaneously after you give us the answers to the questions. And we can then help you build this actionable roadmap. Because one of the things I've seen, and Keith and Brian, you can keep me honest on this, when we as consultants from the outside try to build a roadmap, it doesn't know whether you're using the same resources across the projects. We might say privileged identity and identity management both need extreme interest, but you know that it's those same 2 key people that are going to do both. And you can tell us, look, don't prioritize these 2 and put them on the roadmap one behind the other, because neither will get done. So we have actually taken the IAM map process that Keith was talking about. We offer the actionable roadmap, which we all do together. And it's really, we found this is very successful. So I wanted to just add that if you're sitting in a spot where you're going, oh yeah, great, these guys are talking about benchmarking, but what? We not only let you benchmark, but then 6 months down the road, once you've launched your governance program, and we have customers doing this, they can measure again and see if their project initiatives are going right. And since it's an automated mechanism, you actually can do it yourself, and we can host it for you, but we can always help you review the results. So not only do you have a method to baseline where you are, but also to measure your program governance as you go across the board.
Yeah,
and I wanted to add that because I think that's a useful thing, because we letter grade you against your peers and then help you measure success.
Yeah, and a picture's worth 1,000 words, especially when you're communicating to stakeholders. Yep. So very important to have visualizations to communicate this information as well. So Katie, I think we've got time for a couple questions here. Do you have a couple that we can address?
Yes, it looks like we still have about 6 minutes. First question, my organization has a solution for managing employee identities. Can we use the same solution for managing customers? I'll let you guys decide who wants to field it.
Ryan, do you want to take that only because we know you've got a lot of experience there?
So, so I was, and I hate to give you this answer, but I would say it depends. So that's what I would always tell my management team. It depends. So yes, you can. I'll just tell you what we did. So for customers, we never let customers on in a hybrid cloud, which we are, on our prem, our private prem. Ever, never, ever is that identity are you going to find that on our prem? Some customers, we had a portal where it was a separate Windows domain, forest, trust, no trust relationships, so on and so forth. Where we were most successful and where I was trying to drag the business, but at the time, due to COVID restrictions, is put it all in the cloud. I'm a big proponent of cloud identities. It's perfect for a zero trust model. You never have to worry about somebody that has credentials that maybe that's not on your radar and tied into some of your really tight workflows to your HR systems and stuff like that, or even if you have a contractor management system. You can, but I would be very cautious in doing so, and I'd make sure that I took the time from an architectural perspective to make sure I wasn't introducing any risk to the business.
Yep. And we get that question almost with every account that has a big customer pool. How do we leverage some of what we've learned and what we do today to help our customers? In fact, we're seeing more and more with GDPR and other privacy concerns that marketing departments are now being faced with, controls and compliance where they've never had to really deal with that in the same way. So they're turning to the internal enterprise teams who have this expertise and this know-how. And now they're kind of putting that additional burden on these teams. And, it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, the use cases might be a little more straightforward, but there is a lot to, consider and get involved with when you're talking about customer IAM. In fact, the assessment that we do, we have a flavor for both enterprise, which is more internally focused, and then a different one where the questions are slightly different, measured different ways for customer IAM. Both are very important, both are very relevant, both require, ample prioritization and stakeholder support. Same thing we've talked about. I mean, we've been a little more focused on enterprise discussions in this session, but CIAM is just as relevant now with all the privacy concerns that are coming on board.
Well, to add to what you're both saying, when you're talking CIAM too, is you're dealing with a different population that you want to get the ability to get like market level information about those users, not just the ability to secure them and get them in applications, but you want to be able to offer them services or other offerings that you may have. So they may come register for something, but you're going to get within CIAM, you could get information from those users to kind of help guide what else you need to create as an offering moving forward.
Yeah,
well, I would look at it as another thing to say is with customers, you have to give them the option to opt in or opt out, because now we've got all the regulations around that. And you've also got consent management, and you've got areas that you don't have with internal IAM. So it's almost like the wrapper is different. You could use the same technology,
right,
but you would have to wrapper it differently. It's almost like if you give a present to your daughter and your grandmother, you're not going to wrap them the same, right? It may be the same present inside, but you're going to have a different kind of wrapper. I'm not going to say better, I'm aging myself, but you will have different wrapping. And it's literally that thought. They are different audiences with different requirements.
Right. Katie, we can probably squeeze in one more question if you have one.
Okay, but be prepared to answer quick because I like to end on time. Whenever there's a change in technology associated with one of our IAM solutions, all our applications that use services offered by that solution are required to change. Is there any way to work around this challenge?
That's not a quick answer.
Yeah.
I'll give you the 2-second answer. Yes, there are ways to do this, and that's literally around an abstraction interface that you have to build. Again, planned and built, maybe very thin, maybe very, not complex at all, so that your applications always write to something, and your technology can change under the covers, but really that thin layer stays constant. We've done this for a lot of organizations, so it's a 2-second answer, but it can be done.
Very good.
Thank you for the quick answer, Vanita. Well, we are now out of time. I'll make sure to answer all the questions offline that we didn't have time to cover today. I just want to reiterate the next session in our series on identity and access management best practices will be after the holidays. Once again, please give us some suggestions of topics you'd like to see covered in the IAM space. You can enter those now in the question and answer section or email me with your ideas. It was a pleasure having you join us for this panel discussion on the basics of identity and access management, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Brian.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye-bye.